Was it not previously? Oh, we're live. Okay. Thank you so much. We're starting with session 2, the afternoon session. And without further ado, I think we will be kicking off with a presentation from Unicef. Unicef, are you able to hear us? Who will be presenting, Temple? Russell. Russell, are you able to hear us? Okay, he's able to hear us. We're not able to hear you yet. Hi, Russell, can you hear us? Are you unmuted? And all of the general questions one usually asks at the start of a Teams meeting.
Can you hear me?
Oh, there we go.
Colleagues.
Yes, Sofang, I can hear you.
Okay, we are able to hear you as well, colleagues. I think, without further ado, let me give over to Commissioner Sibanyoni. Thank you.
Good day. Is that Miss or Mr. Russell? Okay. Doctor, for record purpose, will you please state your names, full names and surnames, please?
Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Su Fang Guo, Chief of Health and Nutrition in Unicef South Africa Country Office.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes, stop there. And then before you make a presentation, I have to find out whether would you prefer to take a prescribed oath or an affirmation before you make a presentation. And some people sometimes have got an objection towards taking the prescribed oath on a religious basis. Do you still hear me?
No problem for me.
How do you spell your surname?
Guo.
P? Okay. Gua. All right.
Yes.
Do you have any objection in taking a prescribed oath?
No.
Right.
No objections.
No objection. Do you swear that the evidence that you will give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If that is the case, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God." Can you say, "So help me God"?
So help me God.
Thank you. Then you may start and make your presentation.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for inviting Unicef to the provincial inquiry into the right to food and child malnutrition. My colleagues, Gilbert Shivansi, Nutrition Manager in Unicef South Africa Country Office, is joining me for these discussions. So my presentation will include 2 parts. First is global and South Africa child nutrition situation. The second part is proposed actions. Globally, almost 200 million children under 5 suffer from stunting, which is short for age, wasting, thin for age, or both. At least 340 million children suffer from hidden hunger of vitamin and mineral deficiencies. At the same time, 40 million children under 5 are affected by overweight and obesity. This triple burden of malnutrition threatened the survival, growth, and the development of children and of nations. South Africa is one of the countries with triple burden of malnutrition. So what's the nutrition situations for children under 5 in South Africa? Over 1.5 million children, meaning 3 out of every 10 children are stunted. 140,000 children are visited. To compare South Africa with other countries, South Africa is the top 10 high burden countries for severe wasting globally. 1 in 7 children are overweight. So in total, about 2.5 million children are not growing well in South Africa. Here is the stunting rate by province. You can see that the stunting rate are higher in 3 provinces: Free State, Gauteng, and KwaZulu-Natal. And South Africa is not on track to meet the global target on child nutrition, on child stunting, and anemia in women of reproductive age. There's an echo. So why are children malnourished? The immediate drivers are: first, in South Africa, 1 in 7 children born with low birth weight. Low birth weight, which is an indication of maternal undernutrition, accounts for about 20% of stunting. Second, inadequate care driven by inadequate services and practices for pregnant women and children, such as women with anemia is not treated, children with disease or stunting is not treated. So the third driver is unhealthy diet. You can see from the right-hand side the graph. Breast milk is one of the most cost-effective child survival interventions, a first vaccine for children, and the most nutritious food for children under 6 months. However, in South Africa, less than 1/3 of children below 6 months were exclusively breastfed. Starting from 6 months, complementary feeding or solid food are introduced to children. However, only 1 in 5 children are fed with at least 5 groups of food and with right frequencies. 40% of children do not eat egg and or flesh food. 1/3 of children did not eat vegetable or fruit. So this is the situations. There are underlying drivers for child malnutrition, such as inadequate age-appropriate nutrition-rich food, inadequate age-appropriate dietary practices with inadequate food preparation, food consumption, and hygiene practices. Unhealthy food environment, lack of hygiene and sanitation, insufficient resources to enable children and women's right to nutrition, negative or social and cultural norms and actions to children's and women's right to nutrition, and poor governance. So the Child Support Grant is one of the most successful instruments for addressing child poverty, including child malnutrition. Despite the steady expansion of the Child Support Grant over the years, UNICEF's study highlights that many vulnerable children continue to be excluded from the Child Support Grant. You can see from the figure, the younger the children, the higher the exclusion rate. And only half of our children under 1 year old take up child support grant. So why should we concerned about malnutrition, especially severe acute malnutrition or severe wasting? Because it affects the poorest and the youngest children. Severe acute malnutrition is the most lethal type of malnutrition. Without immediate support, they are at imminent risk of death. Children with severe malnutrition are 12 times more likely to die. If they are survived, they have high risk of chronic disease related to nutrition in late years, and have high risk of poor developmental outcomes. They cannot develop their full potentials. This led to at least a 1% loss of GDP to South Africa. So an immediate investment in critical nutrition service is required to prevent loss of life and the long-term damage from the effect of inadequate nutrition. The high number of wasting and the high level of stunting in an upper middle income countries like South Africa needs to shift from being a major embarrassment to a highly achievable campaigns that result in zero wasting and zero stunting. To achieve zero wasting and zero stunting, we call for a systematic approach to improve nutrition outcomes. This approach captures the interaction and the interconnections across health, food, water sanitation, education, and social protection systems. Using a systematic approach will ensure providing nutritious, safe, affordable, and sustainable diet for children, adolescents, and women, while ensuring adequate nutrition services and positive nutrition practices across the life cycle. We need a food system that produces a range of nutritious food that are available and affordable to families. We need a health system with well-trained staff at facilities and at communities to counsel caregivers on the benefits of a nutritious, diverse diet for children. We need a water and sanitation system that provides free, safe, and palatable drinking waters for a healthy diet and the safe preparation of foods. We need a functioning social protection system that reduces inequities by ensuring that nutritious food are affordable to vulnerable children and families. We need an education system that offers a large platform for improving children's diet, delivering children's services, fostering positive nutrition practices among children, adolescents, and families, while nurturing the new generations of well-nourished and nutrition literate boys and girls. My recommendations for nutrition-specific interventions include address the micronutrient deficiency and reduce obesity, especially in adolescent girls, improve maternal nutrition, increase coverage for exclusive breastfeeding in the first 6 months, using every opportunities to promote growth monitoring and promotion, considering food supplementations together with counseling of caregivers in food insecure settings, and regulate, monitor, and strengthen the food fortification programs. So my recommendations for nutrition-sensitive interventions include, first, strengthen child support grant, including improve the take-up rate for small children, increase the child support grant so that it covers the cost of a nutritious food basket for families, and design of cash plus programs. Second, improve maternal education and ensure universal maternal and child health care. Third, ensure access to adequate water, sanitation, and hygiene, especially in home, early childhood development centers, and schools. So my recommendations to build an enabling environment so as to reduce child malnutrition, including implement evidence-based program at all service delivery levels, including health facilities and community-based platform. Build a skilled workforce and employ enough community health workers. Allocate enough financial and human resources, and having an adequate supply of equipment and infrastructure, and also improve the quality of care for health and nutrition program. And lastly, ensure strong leadership and governance. So lastly, I want to mention, well, the national, provincial, and the district governments have primary accountabilities for upholding children's rights. The private sector has a key role to play as a provider of food, goods, and services. However, the business practices must respect and support and not undermine young children's right for nutrition. Unicef is very happy to support the country to improve the child nutrition situations. I thank you. My colleagues Gilbert is with me, and we are happy to answer the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Guo. I think your presentation was very succinct and to the point. Commissioner, can I hand over to you for questions if you have any?
We cannot hear.
Can you hear us, Doctor, Unicef colleagues?
Sorry, we can't hear you.
Are you able to hear us now? Doctor, can you hear us now? We're just trying to sort out the technical issues quick. You can give an indication the moment you are able to hear us, the colleagues from UNICEF.
We can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. Commissioner Sibanyoni, would you like to start off the session of questions?
May I find out who's going to be responding to questions? How many people?
Gilbert will respond to the questions from our side.
Right. Gilbert, may I just find out whether would you like to take an oath or an affirmation? Do you have an objection towards taking the prescribed oath?
No, I have no objection, Commissioner.
Can you just, for record purpose, state your full names and surname?
My name is Gilbert Chitaudzi.
Do you swear that the information that you will provide is going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If that is the case, will you please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God"?
So help me God.
Thank you, Doc. And then on my side, I don't have questions. I wonder whether my colleagues will have questions. Thank you.
Commissioner Makwetla, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah. Thank you. Can you comment on the link between birth registration and child malnutrition in South Africa?
Would you like to answer potentially that question before we go into another round of questions?
Okay, yeah. Let me attempt to answer it. If not, and I think my colleague Russell, who deals mainly with social protection, can also, come in. The main issue from our side, as health and nutrition, because we see, the social protection, system as playing a very, critical and vital role in addressing childhood undernutrition. So if children are not registered early once they are born, so this leaves, families to be vulnerable to malnutrition because they cannot access the grant that is supposed to assist them in terms of procuring nutritious foods that can then be fed to their children. So there is really a very direct link to registration of children at birth as well as to child malnutrition. Hence, we have really tried to put an emphasis on that point, that there is a need to strengthen that linkage and ensure that all children that are born are then linked to this social protection, especially the child support grant, so that they are able to get the support that they require in order to prevent the occurrence of childhood undernutrition. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much. I've got a few questions that I'd like to just maybe touch on. My first one relates to, and I think Dr. Guo made a comment on that as a parting note, is the role the private sector has to play in respect of malnutrition. And I think this is the first presentation that we've received where we address the issue of obesity as well. So my question would be for you just to comment on the specific role that the private sector has to play in when we address the inadequate nutrient-rich foods, and whether that is something that our country has to be concerned about, and whether we do in fact have the safeguards and measures in place to make sure that the affordable food that is available for parents to procure for their kids are in fact nutrient-rich and not, as we heard this morning, pumped full of things that kids should not be consuming. So in your view, potentially my first question is whether the private sector, first of all, has a role to play here, and whether we've got the measures in place to hold them to account if the foods that they are in fact selling to our kids and the families are not up to a certain level. So the measures, are they in place? If not, what would your recommendation be? How can South Africa strengthen that area of our regulatory framework? For instance, I know that in terms of formula feeding babies, we have certain measures there that encourages breastfeeding. But how else can we strengthen this to ensure that the foods that our families in fact do obtain are nutritious and capable to respond to the needs of our vulnerable communities? So that's my first question. Perhaps maybe you want to answer that, and then we'll move on to the next.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Yes, indeed, the private sector has got a big role to play in terms of really addressing the issues related to childhood undernutrition. One of the critical roles that you have already alluded to is there is a fortification program in South Africa, food fortification program, which act as a safety for the entire population, which will also include children, especially our staple foods, in this case maize meal and flour, that is largely consumed by the poor of South Africa. It's fortified with adequate vitamins and minerals, and these are really vitamins and minerals of concern to the South African public in general, especially our young children. So one of the critical roles is to ensure that the private sector does what the regulatory framework which talks to food fortification stipulate in terms of what needs to be added to this staple food. So it is critical that the private sector need to adhere to the regulations that prescribe what should be added into our maize meal as well as our flour, because we know that most of the children, when families introduce solid foods to their children, what we always refer to as complementary food, they will start with maize meal. So if that maize meal is fortified with essential vitamins and minerals, it will indeed help it will go a long way in terms of really addressing the issue of micronutrients, especially in young children. Another critical issue that we see the private sector playing is to ensure that we know that we also have, I can say we have got two epidemics in South Africa: undernutrition, as well as on the other hand we also have this epidemic of overnutrition. Many children are becoming overweight and obese, and there are a number of issues that the private sector can play in terms of ensuring that the food that is produced is nutritious and it does not really cause children it doesn't really result into this obesogenic environment that we are confronted with. But also from the other side, the regulators also have a critical role to play by ensuring that the South African public is protected and also empowered to make the right choices in terms of food. In this case, we call upon the regulators who are who are government in particular to ensure that the labeling regulations are revised to ensure that they protect the South African public in terms of ensuring that the South African public is given an opportunity to be able to choose food that are nutritious, food that will not cause them to be overweight and obese, food that will make sure that it provides them with the nutrients that they need. There is a need to ensure that the front of pack labeling regulations that have been in the pipeline for some time be expedited, be fast-tracked in terms of really the finalization from the government side. But also another critical factor that the industry can play is really to limit the advertisement of unhealthy foods to children, because we know that adverts really are a major play a critical role in terms of influencing what families can buy and what children can consume, be it at home and also within the school, within our school food environment. So we know that the industry most of the industries have signed a pledge, which is really voluntary. And we call upon the industry, in the absence of the regulatory framework, to adhere to that to that code of conduct, so that the advertisement of food, to prohibit the advertisement of unhealthy food to children. But on the other hand, we are also calling upon the regulators to fast track the implementation of this regulation, to make sure that children are provided with safe and nutritious food for for their development. Thank you.
Thank you very much. My next question, I think, was also touched on on the last slide of the presentation, and it was whether you think that the child support grant in South Africa is sufficient to address the important right to healthy, to basic nutrition of the kids in this country. So maybe you want to just comment specifically on that, but whilst doing that, I wanted to touch base on you with, in respect of the adequacy of the CSG, but also what else? What else do you propose, or would you propose, we can do as a country to supplement, literally and figuratively, the provision of food to our kids? Now, why I'm asking that is we usually look at the budgetary constraints and resources within the country, and why certain resources are not available for immediate rollout. But would you agree with me that in respect of the long-term effects of, for instance, stunting, and the health effects and the pressures that would place not only on the education system in the long term, but also on the health system in the longer term, would almost trump the expenditure that one would push into the supplementing, let's say, for instance, the CSG, so as to cater specifically to the nutritional needs of children? So that's more hypothetical and maybe a hypothesis, rather, to say that is there an offset, one can argue, to say that the burden that malnutrition and SAM and stunting will place on the system at a later stage is potentially more than supplementing the existing CSG, or coming up with another proposal of fortifying the food that kids are in fact consuming. So that, but walking hand in hand with, if you can just give me a bit more information on the Cash Plus programs that was referred to. I'm a bit unclear on that. Maybe you can just indicate to the panel exactly what that would entail. Thank you for now.
All right, thank you very much. I'll take part of this question and also ask Sufang, Dr. Guo to also maybe respond specifically to the Cash Plus. Yes, Commissioner, the child support grant as it stands right now is simply not enough to cover the basic nutritional needs of children. And there's been, a number of submissions and voices added by the civil society organizations on this matter. And we believe that really it's high time that we reconsider the current, I think, child support grants that we provide to our children, on how best can we improve. How can we increase that amount so that it can at least, cover the basic nutritious needs of children? We have seen, the price increase. The recent crisis globally have really added, the strain to these families. They're simply not able to make ends meet, and this will have severe consequences for children. As you have already alluded to, the issue of really the long-term effects, which are really worrisome for South Africa, for an upper middle income country, where you have more than 27% of our children were stunted. And we know the long-term effects of stunting on the developmental outcomes of these children. So basically, we're saying, 27% of our children are, their future is literally doomed, because it affects their future earnings, incomes. It will also affect, the economic growth of this country if we do not address this. So we are of the view that these safety net interventions, safety net programs, that really seek to assist the poorest amongst us need to be strengthened. Another aspect is that some of the the food fortification program, which also talks directly to addressing micronutrient deficiencies, also need to be strengthened in this country, because it's also acts as a safety net for the most vulnerable and the poor in this country. So we believe that there is a need to put more investments now, so that we are able to reap the benefits in future. It is not just a matter of when, it is something that has to happen now. We cannot afford to have the starting rate that is not going down for the past 20 years in an upper middle income country like South Africa. Something has to happen, something needs to be done as a matter of urgency. So all the interventions that currently exist need to be strengthened, and some of them need to be scaled up to ensure that the most vulnerable of our population benefit from this program. But on the other hand, we are of the view that there is a need to really a push for the increase in terms of really the child support grant, but also ensuring that all these systemic issues in terms of registration of children are really taken into consideration. So I think I will pass over to Sufang to comment specifically on the Cash Plus program. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Gilbert. So I want to mention 2 points. First is regarding the concept of 1,000 days. I'm sure many people have learned the first 1,000 days of a children's life is the most important. And if we give them good nutrition and health from the conception until the 2 years of life, it will impact and it will ensure that children development their full potentials. So the first 1,000 days is very important. My second point is regarding the child support grant. I would congratulate the South African government having the child support grant, which is really a very good way to address child poverty and the child nutrition. So, but you see, this is a very good platform. So we can use this platform to do additional things. Of course, we are not suggesting to have any conditions for this child support grant. But from our side, what I mentioned, the Cash Plus is well using this child support grant, this platform to do additional things. For example, whenever families receive this child support grant, we can using these opportunities to provide nutrition educations to caregivers, to family members, so that they know how to care for children. So anyway, using this child support grant, these platforms to better, we need to better utilize these platforms for the health and the nutrition for children and the pregnant women. Over.
Thank you very much. Then just the last comment, it'll assist in poverty alleviation and the bigger picture thinking, basically. So from your side, what else can be done to popularize breastfeeding amongst mothers and potential mothers? And are we doing enough as a country? And what hurdles do you think are currently in place, influencing mothers from not taking a decision or not necessarily committing to breastfeeding their children for the first 2 years of their lives? And then also just maybe footnoting that of course, labor laws, etc., and the poverty rate in this country necessitates mothers to potentially return to the workplace very soon after giving birth, which would then place the child in the care of either the grandmother or the extended family, or in creches or daycares. So, in terms of that thinking, how do we overcome that and start popularizing something that it's almost a low-hanging fruit, it would appear, to address the malnutrition rate, which is very prevalent at that starting phase of a child's life. And with that, that would be my final comment, after which I'm going to give you back to Commissioner Makwetla. Do you have another question? You're fine. Okay, so if you maybe can just answer with the specific focus on the breastfeeding element.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Yeah, indeed, we can still do more in terms of promoting, supporting, and protecting breastfeeding in South Africa. There are various interventions and strategies that the government of South Africa, civil society, and development partners have put in place. And recently, I mean, last week, we know that the whole week we were really, celebrating the World Breastfeeding Week, which is another way of reconscientizing the South African population on the importance of this intervention, especially, for child survival. And it is one of those critical interventions within really the first 1,000 days of the child's life, as Dr. Gwe has alluded to. There are a number of issues that need to be looked at. How do we make sure that we normalize breastfeeding in our communities? Because this is an intervention, this is something that happens at a household level. How do we normalize it? How do we make it normal so that it is something that becomes a default choice for each and every household in South Africa? That is something that we need to look at. However, we are also mindful of the fact that for it, there is a need to protect breastfeeding in this country. In this case, we are very mindful of the fact of what the food industry, especially the infant formula industry, play in this role in this area. We have seen really over a number of years the aggressive marketing of infant formula, which directly undermine mothers' choice to breastfeed. That is something that needs to be looked at. And we know that the government of South Africa is looking into the existing regulatory framework to strengthen it, because there are quite a number of loopholes that are making the country not to reach the desired rates for South Africa. 31%, 32% compared to our neighboring countries is extremely low. And we're unlikely to even reach 50% of our exclusive breastfeeding rates in 2025, as part of the global targets. So that is another issue that we need to look at, to ensure that the marketing, especially of infant formula, is well regulated, to ensure that it does not undermine the mother's choice in terms of breastfeeding. But at the community level, this is where we need to put more emphasis on. We need to mobilize our communities. We need to mobilize, caregivers, especially in households where you'll find that you have teenage mothers. They need support from the grannies. They need support from everybody, within the household, so that they are able to successfully breastfeed their children. But we also would want to really urge, our workplaces to be more supportive to breastfeeding mothers, because most of these mothers, when they return back to work, they're not given, adequate support One, in terms of ensuring that if they choose to express breast milk, they are not provided with the necessary facilities where they can store this breast milk that they've expressed for their children, which they can then take home to feed their children. So the workplace need to improve. Obviously, that is also linked to our labor laws in terms of the maternity leave that is given to pregnant women. We know that most of them spend at least maybe 2 or 3 or 4 weeks before they have to go back to work. And what happens when they leave the child behind? Then the child is not going to be breastfed. And this will lead to malnutrition. And it will lead to all the issues that are related to childhood undernutrition in this country. So there is still a lot of work that needs to be done. And we believe that the South African government is really moving towards the right direction. But we need to intensify our efforts in terms of ensuring that all the available instruments that are at our disposal right now are really fully utilized and fully implemented. Thank you. Over.
Thank you so much. I think that brings me to the end of my questions. Commissioner Makwetla, are you fine? Commissioner Sivanyon?
Thank you. Just one question from my side. What is the level of the knowledge of the importance of vegetables and fruits as a nutritious food? And if there is some concern, what can be done? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Over to you, colleagues.
Well, I think majority of the South African public do understand, the role of vegetables and fruits. But I think the major challenge is really the accessibility and the availability of these vegetables and fruits. How do we ensure that they are accessible to the poorest of the poor in this country? How do we create an enabling environment so that they are accessible and available to this to families and households? That is the main issue that we need to address. In terms of the knowledge, most of the people do understand really the role that vegetables and fruits can play, but the major stumbling blocks is really the accessibility and therefore the availability, depending on where people are situated. For example, people who live maybe in informal settlements, how do we ensure that they access vegetables and fruits? How do we make sure that they become available to them at an affordable price, of course? So these are the issues that we need to look at and ensure that we create an enabling environment for these essential foodstuffs to be available to these vulnerable communities. Thank you. Over.
Thank you so much, colleagues from Unicef. It's really valuable. And if I can just request a copy of the presentation, Tembi. Okay, thank you so much. It has been very enlightening and very valuable. And thank you also for the work that you do in the country and the support that you provide to the government and stakeholders in respect of this very important area of law, which is children's rights. And I think with that, Commissioners, I think we can excuse our colleagues from Unicef and relieve you. And we do hope that you tune in to the rest of the week as well. And again, we thank you for the presentation today.
Thank you very much, Commissioner.
I think with that, our next presentation, it would be from the CSIR, Prof. Ulofse. Can you hear us? And before we delve right in, just apologies from our side. I know that you were due to present about 40 minutes ago, and we have been a bit outside of the schedule this time around. We do apologize for it, and we do wish that you can still proceed with your presentation, and we thank you for that. I'm going to hand you over to Commissioner Sibanyoni.
Professor Ulofse, are we audible? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mine is to administer the oath, or alternatively, an affirmation And I would like to find out from you, do you have any objection in taking the prescribed oath?
No, I don't.
Right, for record purposes, can you just say your full names and surname?
Susanna History Lena Olofse.
Thank you very much. Sure dat u informatie wat u gaan gee sal die waarheid wees, die hele waarheid en niks anders as die waarheid nie. Indien dit so is, steek u regterhand en sê, so help my God.
So help my God.
Dankie. You can then make a presentation in English for the benefit of everybody around here. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just quickly going to share my screen. Here's my presentation. I'm just struggling to get it into presentation mode, so just give me 1 second. That's also not working. Okay, can you see my presentation correctly in full screen mode?
Yes, we confirm we can see your presentation, increasing reliable scientific data. You may proceed.
Thank you very much. Yes, I was asked to do this presentation around food waste in South Africa. And since we are running late and I've got another appointment, I am going to skip through a few slides. So just in terms of the definition, what do we talk about when we talk about food loss and waste? We are specifically concerned about edible products that is going to go to human consumption. So food that is originally meant for human consumption but is not consumed by humans are considered to be food loss and waste and therefore included in our definition. So even food that is diverted to animal feed is considered waste in this context. So just to put you in perspective, the reason why we did this study is South Africa is a signatory to the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, and we have to report on our progress against targets of the SDGs, and the specific target relating to food waste is for South Africa, or actually for the world, to by 2030 halve our per capita global food waste at the retail and consumer level and reduce food losses along production and supply chains, including post-harvest losses. So this is quite a tall order. So therefore, the Department of Science and Innovation provided funding for us to look at doing an assessment of or an estimate of food losses and waste in South Africa, specifically looking at assumptions relevant in the South African context and also using the latest available data, and then to do or to undertake updated calculations of the magnitude of food waste in South Africa, a picture of how much food actually goes to waste or is lost in South Africa. So the approach was, first of all, to do a critical analysis of the assumptions that was used in previous estimates. And here specifically the questions asked was, the different commodities used in the assumptions, are they relevant in the South African context? Are the production systems, harvesting models, and methods, processing technologies, retail systems, etc., all appropriate for the South African conditions? And also, are the scale of the operations in line with what is happening in South Africa? Now, the reason why this was necessary is the previous assessments that was done used the same methodology as for the global study. And in the global study, they used assumptions for sub-Saharan Africa. And even though South Africa sits in sub-Saharan Africa, I think it is quite clear that our processes and systems around our food supply chains in South Africa are a bit more aligned with European and developed country systems than necessarily the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. So therefore it was necessary to update the assumptions. And then also, since year-on-year food production varies, it wasn't possible to do a calculation for a specific year. We decided therefore to rather do a calculation based on the average food supply from the Food and Agriculture Organization food balance sheets between 2014 and 2018, a 5-year period, to get to an average wastage per year. And as you can imagine, we had to use quite a bit of assumptions in this process. So by no means do we say that the estimate is accurate, but it is the best estimate at this point in time as a baseline to also inform actions that are required to improve our situation to waste less food. So the way this approach is applied is we applied the assumptions that were made to the different commodity groups, specifically cereals, roots and tubers, oilseeds and pulses, fruit and vegetables, meat, fish and seafood, and milk. And we also divided the food supply chain into specific stages in the chain: agricultural production, post-harvest handling, storage, processing and packaging, distribution and consumption. And for each of the commodity groups, we then estimated the percentage loss at each stage in the supply chain. And the percentage losses that we came up with is what you have on the screen at the moment. And we then used these percentages to calculate at each stage of the supply chain how much food from production enters into the supply chain. In other words, how much is harvest, then subtract the percentage wastage to determine then which goes into the next phase, which is the post-harvest handling and storage, and so forth across the entire supply chain to be able to calculate then the food waste and losses. So if I then jump into the simplified conclusions, the results indicated that of all the produce entering primary production, in other words, what is harvested in the fields or that is available for harvest in the fields, about 3.8% of that is lost or wasted. And that comes down to about 868,890 tons. The next stage in the supply chain is the post-harvest handling and storage. 9% of the food that enters that stage gets wasted, and that amounts to about 1.9 million tons of food. For processing and manufacturing, it's 27% in the stage of the supply chain that gets wasted, and that amounts to 5 million tons. If we look then at retail, wholesale and distribution, it's 3.9% entering this stage that goes to waste, which amounts to 500,000 tons, 580,000 more or less. And then households and at household or consumer level, it's 13% of the food that actually reach the household or consumers that is wasted, that enters that part of the supply chain, and that is 1.8 million tons. And in total, if you add all the tonnages up, it comes to 10.3 million tons of food going to waste in South Africa. And if you then look at the subdivision of where in the supply chain the most food gets wasted of this 100%, it's quite a significant portion, namely 49%, which is nearly half, that goes to waste during processing and manufacturing. And another point of concern also is actually split between post-harvest handling and storage at 19% and household and consumer waste at 18%. Our biggest concern is around household and consumer wastage, because that is where the food already has the highest value in terms of value addition throughout the value chain. And this is where one would expect consumers to be able to consume the food and not waste it. But we also see in the comparing this assessment with previous assessments, there was a shift in the wastage as compared to the previous assessments, which used sub-Saharan Africa assumptions. And the shift that we saw is that there's more wastage happening at the processing and manufacturing stage, less at the production stage, and also significantly more at the household and consumption level. Now, if we look at what we are wasting, this is just the comparison that I've just spoke about. You will see the increase is quite high as compared to previous years in terms of processing, as well as in terms of consumption. And that is the two places where we can see that we are more that the results look more like developed country results as compared to developing country results. And this means also that South Africans go for pre-processed or for processed foods, which also speaks to convenience and the fact that we use supermarkets for food distribution quite significantly in South Africa. And then at the consumption stage, the wastage is also quite high, also because people see food as a disposable commodity. We are far divorced from food production on the farm, and therefore people don't think twice before they throw food away. And if we then just look at what are the commodities most wasted, it is quite interesting that the cereals in the latest estimate is the highest with 50%. And the reason why we see cereals being wasted so much is simply also because cereals is a staple food and therefore probably in terms of weight, one of the biggest portion of our food basket. And other research that was done by students of mine clearly indicated that cereals that are most wasted is pop, rice and bread. That is what households reported as being wasted a lot. Then the second commodity group, which is quite significant, is our fruit and vegetables, sitting at 19%. And the reason for that wastage is because that is the food with the shortest shelf life and which is probably also most prone to wilting and wastage if it is not stored properly at home or during the supply chain, and if there are breakages in the cold chain that needs to be maintained. So that is our perishable products. That is where we see the most wastage happening, but there is also quite a significant amount of milk being wasted, and then also tied probably to the value of meat, we see less meat being wasted, but also around 9%. And this can be linked to also the bones and the fat that is part of the meat that is put forward for people to eat and which is not necessarily consumed. If we then just look at the conclusions in a nutshell, 10.3 million tons of food losses and waste occurs on average per year in South Africa. It's quite important that this amounts to 34.3% of the food that is locally produced if we include the exports. But if we then look at the food that is available in South Africa by using production plus imports, less exports, then it comes to 45% of the food that is available in South Africa that is lost or wasted throughout the supply chain. And here specifically, the alignment of assumptions with local conditions resulted in the fact that we saw a spread of losses across the value chain that is slightly different as compared to earlier estimates, which we can explain. And therefore, we say that 49% of the losses occur during processing and packaging. And this is also related to the fact that we use supermarkets for distribution. We use a lot of packaging, and if food is not appealing, then it will already be sorted out at the processing and packaging stage of the supply chain and not even make it onto the shop shelves. So that's why there are so many losses there. Then we see 18% losses at the consumption stage, and this is compared to a 5% that we had earlier. And about 50% of all the losses are attributed to cereals, and as I said, it's because it's staple food. And the other 19% that is a big concern is fruit and vegetables, which are perishable and therefore have a short shelf life and are typical, very sensitive to climate conditions during storage. And just in terms of recommendations, our data is mostly informed by fairly small studies, which are not really suitable for extrapolations. So therefore, we need more bigger studies to inform the data better. And we also haven't included the informal food distribution or even food production systems in South Africa, or even the less formal food production systems, simply because of the scale of the work that needed to be done and the availability of data. So we used a 2080 principle where we basically used the 20% of data that we had available and can say with fairly good confidence that we are comfortable with the results that we got to. But if you are interested in reading the full reports, they are available on the intranet or internet, and there is the link provided as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Prof, if you don't mind, just a few minutes for a few follow-up questions after we're going to release you. Commissioner Sibanyon.
Thank you, Prof. I don't disagree with your recommendations, but insofar as the wastage of food, I see you are saying there should be large studies. Wouldn't you also maybe agree that there should also be thorough education, educating the population about the importance of not wasting food? Thank you.
Certainly, Commissioner, you hit the nail on the head. If you go to the website that is listed here, you will see we have also developed a guideline for minimization of food waste and losses throughout the supply chain, and that document was developed in partnership with the Department of Environmental Affairs. And it specifically identifies the main reasons for wastage at each stage of the supply chain and makes some recommendations on how we can reduce this. But we certainly see that raised awareness about losses and waste does have a positive impact in that we then see significant reductions. And here I can mention that here in Tshwane at the fresh produce market, when the market agents were made aware of the wastage that's happening, within a month, they nearly cut wastages by 50% at the market, just because of raised awareness. So that is certainly something to consider. Thanks.
Thank you, Prof. Just a question from Commissioner Makwetla's side.
Thank you. What are we going to do about the high rates of losses in South Africa?
That is a very good question, Commissioner. I think we need to raise awareness throughout the supply chain at all levels. But what also always jumps to mind when we start talking about food waste and losses is the losses that is associated with poor road conditions, especially when we talk about fruit and vegetables, because of the bruising that happens during transport. So I think that is one point where we can really make a big difference. And at household level, I think there we can think about educating people about better meal planning, better shopping planning, and also then about how to plan your meal portion sizes so that there's less leftover food, that we don't sit with leftovers that needs to be consumed, which mostly ends up as being wasted at the end. But yes, there's a lot of things that can be done. Most of it is common sense, but there are also more technical issues that needs to be addressed. So we just need to raise awareness both about the wastage, but also about how we can prevent it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just a quick one from my side, Prof. So it looks like the processing, manufacturing, and packaging leg contributes to the biggest loss. And it would also seem like these are non-perishables if we take out of the equation the bread factor in terms of the cereals. I'm just wondering, should we address the losses at that level? Who stands to benefit? If the loss is addressed, say for instance we bring the 45% down to 20%, who stands to benefit from addressing that loss? I'm just trying to understand in the bigger picture. In a perfect utopia, I would want to take 40% of the losses and provide that to vulnerable communities to ensure that we don't have children dying from hunger. But let's say we do address that, and it does. We get that percentage down. What is the end effect in your hypotheses? How would that look? That's number one. And then number two, would you agree, and that's now with the premise that we have not gone through your report thoroughly, and we will do so after accessing it online, but would you agree that government departments then work in silos? Excuse the pun, but if one would look at your report that was in cooperation or coordination with the Department of Environmental Affairs, does trade and industry have a say there? Do we speak to health about that? Do we speak to our other stakeholders? Or would you say that we are still working very much in silos, and that's why the information in terms of awareness potentially is not going down to the consumer as well? So those are my two areas for your comments, please.
Okay, the first comment is that the losses and wastage during processing and packaging is not limited to the staples. It also talks to the fruit and vegetables, and there specifically it is around also the standards put forward by the retailers as to what they want in the packets. Certain retailers will, for instance, prescribe a packet size, and beans that are too small won't get put into the bag. If you talk about green beans, patty pans that are too small won't end up in the punnet, but also not too big ones. So there's a huge loss happening at that stage due to the way that we currently engage with the food and vegetables in terms of packaging and what is put forward on the shelves in the retailers. So I think there's an opportunity to speak to the retailers to also rethink their standards, because there is no quality difference in a big baby marrow as compared to a small one, but the big ones tend to not make it into the punnets because of the size issue. So I think that is the one thing to keep in mind. Then your comment around silos, yes, certainly we still sit with a lot of silos, but in this regard, I think we also have, we still have too little accurate data to make good suggestions as to how to address some of the issues. A lot more research needs to be done around the root causes of all the wastage that are happening. But my sense is that if we can reduce the losses and the waste throughout the supply chain, we will be able to feed all the hungry people in South Africa, because according to statistics, we already produce enough food in South Africa to feed everyone. And I know in terms of food security, everyone is looking at how can we increase food production to feed the hungry in the future, whereas those scenarios just build on the current losses and wastage without considering that we can reduce the need for additional food quite substantially if we simply reduce the wastage along the supply chain. I hope that answers the question, Commissioner.
I just want to just touch on that. Sorry, Commissioner, just one moment. I just want to understand again. So if we reduce the wastage, who's going to benefit? Will the end consumer, will the people of South Africa benefit? What I'm trying to get at is that, or will that just shift to the private sector? Will they be benefiting out of this, and the prices will keep the same? So I'm looking at a supply and demand issue here as well. So if we don't have so many choices in terms of vegetables, we potentially can push up the price. But if we have a proper supply chain management or cold storage or that link, that one, at the end of the day, the consumer have a lot of choice and a lot of options, wouldn't that then have an impact on the profitability of the product? I'm really just trying to see that we are taking away the wastage, but will that in fact translate to the end user having more access, or will that translate in the manufacturer vis-a-vis supermarket producer making more profit?
Okay, I think it's definitely going to benefit the user, in the sense that currently the retailers already built into their price the cost of end-of-life management of the waste that is incurred. So if they have to send wastage to a landfill, this cost implied, then that cost is already factored into the price. So if we can reduce the wastage at each stage of the supply chain, we can reduce the cost. So the prices of food should actually come down, and it's not going to impact the farmers necessarily negatively, because they will still be able to push their food that they produce onto the market even more. But the wastage along the supply chain will be less, so therefore the cost factored in to deal with the wastage along the supply chain will be less, and therefore the prices all along could be cheaper. But I'm not an economist, so we haven't done detailed studies around how this can in fact impact it.
Thank you. That's definitely valuable from my point of view. So in theory, one would then hypothesize that food prices would actually go down. And it's important for us, and it's important for watchdogs as well, to say that once we do conduct these studies and there's a decrease in wastage and there's a decrease in, or an increase in awareness and efforts, that one would have to have a close eye on the ground as well to see whether that in fact translates to the end user at the end of the day. And that's very important for us to keep in the back of our mind as well. Prof, that is all from my side. That was very valuable. Thank you so much. Commissioner Sibanyoni, do you have something else?
Prof, I'm mindful that you said there is another engagement that you are rushing to, but it triggered this question when you were talking about the city of Tshwane. And I would like you maybe to speak briefly about the food bank. Has your study also looked at the effect of the food banks that are provided, and also the couple that with the decentralization of the market? Because when you talk about the city of Tshwane, most people are supplied by Marabastad in Pretoria, but there was some thought of decentralizing the distribution. And lastly, you know, I hope the farmers and the farm workers don't hear that the amount of the food that they produce gets to be wasted. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you, Commissioner. Unfortunately, no, our study didn't go into detail on how much of the food waste is redistributed by the food banks. That is certainly something that's also worthwhile looking at. So yeah, I cannot really comment on that. I'm not aware of the decentralization of the fresh produce markets. That is just during the the course of this research that we've spoken to the fresh produce market, and the savings that they managed there came up in the discussion after they raised it with the market agents. But certainly, we must also consider that when we talk about food waste, it is all the food that is aimed at human consumption that was produced for that purpose. And currently, a lot of the food losses and waste that are encountered on farm is directed to animal feed and therefore not seen as a waste on the farm. And similarly, even in processing, a lot of the food is directed to other lines which has non-food applications. So it's not seen as a loss for the companies because they still have a product that they can push onto the market, but it does impact on the availability of food that was supposed to go to human consumption that's not consumed by humans. And with that, unfortunately, you will have to excuse me. I'm already running late for my another meeting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. It was very insightful, and we do hope to engage with you in the future again. With that, you are excused. Thank you so much. In respect of our last presenter, who will be in person, we are welcoming Mr. Mangaliso. He is an educator at Uviwe Secondary School and Senior Secondary School, and he's a Rhodes University graduate of Industrial Psychology, to give us a bit of a contextual wrap-up and final submission for the day. So maybe we take 1 second just to make sure that all of the connections are done to include Mr. Mangaliso. Yeah, please have a seat. Thank you so much. We are ready to proceed with the last presentation of this day one of our inquiry into the right to food and child malnutrition. So to wrap up this day, we will be assisted by Mr. Mangaliso. He is an educator at Uviwe Senior Secondary School, as well as a Rhodes University graduate and of industrial sociology. I said psychology, sociology, apologies. And if you don't mind, I'm going to hand you over to Commissioner Sibanyoni for the administration of the oath.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mangaliso.
Good afternoon, Commissioner.
Mine is to administer the prescribed oath, but I have to ascertain from you whether do you have any objection towards taking the prescribed oath, because if you've got an objection, we can make an affirmation.
No objections from my side, Commissioner.
For the record purpose, can you just state your full names and
My
surname?
full names are Lwazi Justice Mangaliso.
Do you swear that the information that you'll give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? If that is the case, please raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you. You may then proceed with your presentation.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. And I'd love to just take this opportunity to thank the South African Human Rights Commission for inviting me as a person that is on the ground and who lives with the realities of poverty. And I just wanted to correct the program. They said they wrote under my name the psychological effects of poverty. And the people that I consulted, they said that this is not a psyche, this is their reality. They live poverty each and every day. And therefore, I think it would only be fair for us to correct my presentation to being the reality of poverty. So in consulting with people on the ground, there are certain key areas I was able to focus on. Some of the issues have been touched by different scholars who have presented here on the commission. One of them was that we have an issue here with government constantly planting trees that bear thorns, not trees that bear fruits. So there was one thing that they said that government needs to look at the fact that they need to start planting trees around cities and around schools that give away fruits so as to counter the issue of malnutrition. We know that subsistence farming is no longer possible, especially in urban areas. One, because of industrialization and the quality of soil. I'll make an example about the township that I'm from, Scenery Park. It is very difficult to plant anything in Scenery Park because of one, how the factories around Scenery Park are actually getting rid of the toxic waste, which has ultimately led to soil erosion. This has hindered them from actually being able to provide for themselves without any form of assistance from government. Another issue is the issue of grants that are not adjusted for inflation. This has been a huge issue for them, as they've seen that when government increases social grants, this is not adjusted for inflation. And therefore, it hinders the purchasing power of that particular rand. We know that, for instance, now with the current war between Russia and Ukraine, we know that food prices have gone up, and therefore the social grants need to be adjusted for all the externalities that are experienced in the economy. Of course, we need to tread carefully in the issues of social grants so that we do not create or we do not worsen the issue of dependency. Again, having too much money or having too little money, in fact, precludes choice. Because these social grants, if they are not adjusted for inflation, then the amount of goods one would pick or would want to buy, then automatically that individual is precluded. Another issue I spoke about on the ground was the issue of the minimum wage, which relates to purchasing power. A lot of debates have been made with regard to the minimum wage bill, and in fact, on how does it affect malnutrition? Well, it affects malnutrition in so many ways. The people on the ground are saying that, again, it precludes choice. And the key thing here constantly is choice, because we know that foods that contain a lot of nutrients seemingly seem to have to be more expensive, rather. And this hinders them from accessing this healthy and nutritious food, and it's only made to seem as if it is for those who have. And I've loved to quote a young kid here that said, we live in a society whereby there are people who get by, and there are those who can buy. And this is their reality, whereby they sleep constantly with empty stomachs. In fact, sometimes eating food that contains no nutrients at all. Another submission I must make is that we know that the right to access to sufficient food is embedded in Section 26 and 27 of our Constitution, and the right to adequate nutrition for children is stipulated in Section 28. The Bill of Rights, which enshrined in the Constitution, states that every citizen has a right to have access to sufficient food, water, and social security, and that the state must take reasonable legislative and other measures within its available resources to achieve the progressive realization of this right. The people have confirmed that this violation of this right is, in fact, violence acted out of sight. And the main perpetrator, according to the people on the ground, is government. As I asked, why do they feel? They say, one, policy making is one of the key issues that they struggle with. They struggle with the integrity of data that is still supplied by Stats SA, as some of them have never been visited by Stats SA, which then hinders the potency of policies that government has set to achieve a society whereby everyone is able to enjoy this right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mangaliso. Commissioner Sibanyoni, would you like to kick off the round of questions?
Thank you, Mr. Mangaliso. You spoke about the effect of industrialization, and it brings to my mind either the change between the ordinary usage of land as well as the further development when it is industrialized. And then my question will be, the land which has been affected by industry, is it worth rehabilitated, or a person cannot rehabilitate it so as to utilize it for plowing, planting, and harvesting? Is it a wasted land that has been affected by the advent of industry? Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner, for that question. I'd like to answer you using this approach. I think when we speak about industrialization, specifically when we speak about toxic waste that is being emitted from these factories, we know that some chemicals can be reversed. The effects that they've done on the soil in terms of soil erosion can be reversed, but some of the chemicals that are used have a longer effect or a longer lifespan on soil, which affects then the integrity of that particular plant that would be planted there and may lead to possible health issues. We know that the government already is still grappling with the COVID-19 pandemic, and again, we don't want to add into an issue whereby now people are infected by probably a disease or an infection that we don't know of. because it has been proven that chemicals do cause illnesses, and in fact, they do affect the life, the quality of life, in fact, because we know that in a lot of developed countries, you are expected to live up to an age of 75. But seemingly in South Africa, you are expected to live to an age of about 45 to 49. This speaks to a huge issue with regards to the industrialization of land, which cannot be used now for subsistence farming. Sorry. A lot of people have tried, and these projects are seemingly, they are failing. And you'd only find that even the crops now, they can't survive under those conditions. Probably it would lead to a question whereby we need to do more research in terms of crops that can survive certain elements or being exposed to certain chemicals. I don't know if I answered you.
You answered correctly. And then this, the effect, is it only acid, or perhaps added to that one is the air pollution that also affects the land that cannot be used to the fullest?
Air pollution does not affect the land, but it affects the quality of life of the people, because remember, we are the ones that are breathing the carbon monoxide probably that is released into the air. Obviously, plants do use the carbon dioxide and other chemicals that are released as a way to, photosynthesize. It's needed by plants, but as far as human beings are concerned, they don't need air pollution because it affects the quality of life at the end of the day, because we want a society whereby people are able to enjoy a healthier life without having to think, oh, what am I eating today? Oh, the thing that I'm eating might lead to an illness, of which we know already that some foods, in fact, that people in township gets exposed to are done in back rooms, counterfeit goods, so to speak, which then leads to us having these goods that are not nutritious, in fact, may lead to obesity or any other illnesses that we are currently facing.
My last question will be, are people or the community educated to plant more trees so that the trees can absorb the...
I think, Commissioner, it goes back to the government first and foremost, having to engage in projects that whereby they start planting more trees that bear fruits. Secondly, to educate then those people on how to run a small farm, so to speak, because we know that we have an issue of education in South Africa, including the people that are in these programs, the EPWP programs, Extended Public Works Program. A lot of those people are being utilized to pick up papers instead of being utilized to run the small gardens or back gardens, so to speak. So I would say also the shift in government's policy in terms of using the EPW to just pick up papers and clean the community. I think another program would be to use them to spot a piece of land that they can utilize to run a project that is going to ensure that there is food security and that people are able to move from a position of being in a poverty-stricken area to maybe a sustainable and self-sufficient community. Because the issue here usually is just self-sufficiency.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Makwetla.
Thank you very much. You said that the people say the people can buy and people who cannot buy.
There are people who get by, and there are those who can buy.
I see. Okay. And then you said something about the students are saying there are no policy making people, especially by Stats SA.
If I may, Commissioner, the integrity of the data that is used by stats, which ultimately is then used by other state organs to either create policies or to start certain projects. They are questioning the integrity because some of them are saying that these same stats do not reflect their reality, because the stats would probably say 30% of people who reside in Snatterpark or reside in the Eastern Cape are unemployed, hypothetically. But you'd find out on the ground, it's more than 30%. And now this leads to an ineffective policy. And even when we come to policy making, the people that make policies are not grounded. They don't have forces on the ground. And therefore now these policies are either made to meet an international standard that is not meeting the people that are going to be directly affected by the policy. The issue of EPWP, again, is one of the issues to fight poverty. But that policy alone is not getting the far reach that it was planned to have, because seemingly it has become a thing of, well, you don't support me as a councillor, then you don't get the job. There are so many things fundamentally that are wrong from the bottom to the top. And now there seems to be a discord between the people on the ground and the policy makers. And when there's a discord, then you're not going to have development.
And then the last thing is, what can the commission do to get to the people on the ground?
That is a very good question, Commissioner. That is a very good question. I think the Commission is embarking on projects to get to the ground, but are they doing enough? Probably not, because as I said, when I spoke with the Commissioner earlier on, I said, how many people in Snatterpark know about this Commission? And you'd find that out of 10 people, only 2. And even those 2 people that know about the Commission, how many of them know the mandate of the Commission? So I think, again, educational programs, but also just having ambassadors in schools, in local communities that make sure that these people are well informed about the Commission and what the mandate of the Commission is, so that the Commission can be seen to be working, because usually the Commission, according to a lot of people, is a very reactive institution, whereby the role of the Commission is to be proactive, because one of its key roles is oversight, making sure that government is protecting the rights of individuals, including the children and the people that are living in this land. So I think educational programs, having ambassadors that are going to constantly educate people about the Human Rights Commission, and yeah, I think that is some things that can be used.
Thank you, Mr. Mangalu. So I think my quick question, or more, I'm going to invite you more to give me anecdotal experience, because I do think you've got a lot of experience with the kids. So from your point of view, your experience at working at the schools and engaging with the kids on the ground, what have you seen the impacts of hunger at the school from learners that you have engaged with? That's perhaps my first request for comment. Secondly, what do you see the kids are eating during break time? Are they eating during break time? What has been your observation of that? And maybe thirdly, the comments about the data integrity and data gathering is interesting. I think I'll take that into consideration as well moving forward, to say that we might be sitting with a peculiar model here, so as to we're responding to certain modalities as opposed to communities. But that's, again, anecdotal from my side, because I'm definitely not a statistician. So maybe from your experience, to provide the Commission with your own experience as working with the kids, what are they eating? Are they eating? How do they deal with hunger? How do they circumvent that? Because I also know from the area that you are coming from and assisting at, These might not necessarily be the grant recipients. These are potentially the missing portion of our community who are earning just enough to get by. But they're not earning enough to buy, but they're also not earning less so that they can go and receive a grant. So it's my understanding that that might be the demographic of your community and the surrounding area. But again, yeah, I think as a parting comment from your side, potentially give us your own experience and in addressing the issues of the children and engaging with the children on the ground.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner. For me, my own personal experience, I've been staying now in Snyder Park for about 2 years. Originally, I reside in Braylon, so I come from a home that is well off. But because I enjoy changing people's lives in whatever way I want to, one, yes, I've seen the effects of hunger. And I think I don't have to say more than to say the uprising, so to speak, that happened last year, which happened in Gauteng and KZN, is enough to say those are the effects of hunger. Of course, we have public media that will say that is looting, that is hooliganism and all that, but those are the effects of hunger. Some of those issues are not documented, and we know if these issues are not documented, then it is seen as if this problem is non-existent. We know hunger has led to a lot of children having to drop out of school and therefore affecting the quality of their life all the way, because that means if they drop out of school, they become part of the pool of unskilled labor. They fall into the realm of exploited labor. So I've seen that and I've lived it. Crime is rife. People are constantly trying to feed their stomachs. What are they eating? Some are not eating. Coming from a school that is quintile 1, you see the effects each and every day. And I see the department trying to mitigate some of these issues, but are they doing enough? No. Because even when I look at the research that they've done in terms of having what type of food on a Monday, on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday, you see that even this food that they're providing is not quality. It does not give proper nutrients. They are trying to minimize costs at all costs. And why then are you then saying that as a government, you have this mandate to ensure that people have access to adequate nutrition, yet you are wanting to cut costs? At Uviwe, we have an issue with children who have dropped out, but always at 11 o'clock, they come wearing their uniforms just to get that meal. That is the reality. And there was a point whereby it was, we wanted to intervene and stop them, but we realized that would be, again, infringing on that basic constitutional right. Although they are not part of the system, they have a right to access to food. So we let things be so that they can access that meal. And some of them, they even say, this is my last meal for the day. So I've seen the effects, and I live the effects every day. You see children underweight. You see children, some of them, because of the lack of choice, as I said, when finances are non-existent, then you are precluded from having any sort of choice. So they eat whatever is offered to them. Again, it creates a health issue because some of them have to beg, and they're given food that is expired. Locally, there is, I don't want to name the establishment, but it sells fruits and veg. Instead of giving people those fruits and veg before the expiry date, or giving the people the food probably at a lesser price than they would be offering the other companies, they'd rather let it rot, and then it would be sold as pig food. So again, we have an issue with the private sector that is constantly prioritizing profits over people's lives, and which leads me to when I read a lot of, dare I say, laws that govern how companies approach corporate social responsibility and corporate social investment. In most of those corporate social responsibilities project that they have, nothing mentions giving food, proper nutritious food. It's always about giving kits, giving financial incentives, but it's never about foods and targeting people who are hungry. Even companies that are dealing in the retail industry, especially with food, do not even think twice about giving food parcels. They just think about the tax break that they will get for probably saying that we had this outreach project. And again, I've seen it because it's something that I live with every day, and it affects academics. They can't concentrate in class, and you have to understand that they come from different backgrounds. But all I'm saying, the effects of poverty precludes them from having a brighter future. This is like someone going to a trial and already they are precluded a fair trial. We know that life is a trial, and therefore we need to have interventions that make sure that these people are included in food security.
Thank you, Mr. Mangali. So I think that has been very valuable and very touching. There's two things that you mentioned that for me stands out. Number one is that kids who are not even, I must almost say, registered at the school anymore would put on a school uniform and go to school so that they can at least have access to some form of nutrition on the day. And to not prevent those kids from having that plate of food, so as to address the Section 28 right to basic nutrition. It is quite alarming, because I also think it is an issue that we are definitely not highlighting enough. So that would be the first one, that thank you for sharing that. And the second would be that corporate would rather have food rot to enable them to sell it onwards as pig food, rather than to give it away. I'm actually, it does not appear like it, but I am left for words. And then maybe just lastly, you've made a comment that obviously poverty affects you progressing in society. And I mean, that just echoes the evidence that was laid throughout the day that says that stunting basically takes, what was the percentage, 27, 30? 30% of our current kids' constituency out of the earning pool in the future. So looking at the kids now who might be tax contribution allies, 30% of them we need to take out because we were unable to feed them. That they will still be suffering from the consequences of poverty and malnutrition as a result thereof. So thank you for highlighting that, and thank you for your own experience as well. That is very valuable in bringing that to the table. That is all from my side. Commissioner Sibanyoni, Commissioner Makwetla, is there anything else? You covered, Commissioner.
Just a parting shot, Mr. Mangaliso. The Human Rights Commission teamed up with the Foundation for Human Rights as well as the University of Pretoria, and thereafter the Department of Basic Education, and they proposed that there should be a subject on human rights. you are sitting next to a champion on a moot court competition, and then out of the subject on human rights, wouldn't you agree that they will also be told that there is an institution that is given powers to guard against the violation of human rights? In other words, there will be knowledge to say, while we are being taught human rights at school level, there are some institutions like the Chapter 9 institutions. What is your comment? Brief comment.
I think for me, having such projects would indeed benefit the commission, in terms of people would now be aware of the commission, its mandate, and so forth. But generally, just having people who are educated enough about their rights, their basic rights that is enshrined in the Constitution, I think it's something that is very important, because that will then mean that that particular society is woke, if I use the contemporary word. It will then help to make institutions such as the Human Rights Commission more active, and because people are going to constantly coming to you guys now saying, there's been this violation, there's been this violation, you guys are going to be piling up cases, and a lot of people are going to start to see your work. But in general, I think people should be taught about the Chapter 9 institutions, all of them. I'm not picking anyone, but people should be taught about them and the role that they play, so that people know where to go to. The issue of Enyobeni, the issues that are arising in communities now, it's because people don't know where to go, and they don't know what is your mandate.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mangaliso, for your submission. We've taken note, and it has been very valuable, and thank you for also coming through and doing that submission in person. I think with that we can release you, and also with that, Commissioners, if there's nothing else from your side, if we can potentially then wrap up this day as day 1, session 1, for our inquiry into the right to food and child malnutrition. We will be continuing on Wednesday morning and kicking off at 8:30 for those who will be joining us online. And we look forward to the participation of all parties throughout the rest of the week, and the deliberations which will follow. So thank you to everyone who has attended in person, and thank you also to those who have attended online. That is a wrap for day 1.